Just because you're the older sister doesn't mean you get to bulldoze my boundaries and read the secrets in my diary. I want to tell you how I taught my annoying sister a lesson for disrespecting my personal space and privacy. And here's how this story begins. My older sister always loved being the star of the show. She didn't need a real microphone. Just her long lashes, a bright white smile, and a voice that people seemed to pick up instantly. Ever since she turned 20, she'd found a new prop, my diary. At first, it was just a cute little party trick during our Sunday family dinners. She'd fish the thin notebook out from under my pillow, always with some glittery cover, sit down next to Mom, and start reading out quotes like she was announcing the winner of some award. My parents laughed. She laughed. I sat there, trying to melt into the air, poking at my salad with my fork. And every single time, one thought burned in my head. This is my life. Why is everyone acting like it's just a comedy sketch? I wasn't born with the idea of keeping a diary. It started because of the constant anxiety I carried around. My thoughts would crash over me like debris in the tide, and my diary was the only way to lay them neatly on the shore. I wrote about my school failures, my first crushes, my daydreams of adult life where I'd have my own room and a door with a real lock. On the pages, I could be funny, silly, romantic, angry, anything the real world wouldn't let me be. My sister found it by accident, though I highly doubt it was an accident. I always hid that notebook carefully, like it was the key to an emergency exit. She claimed she was just cleaning my room, but I knew her idea of cleaning was basically a search operation. Mom called it caring. Dad called it family openness. That was the day I realized openness wasn't our problem at home. Our problem was the lack of closed doors. The first public reading happened at another one of our Sunday dinners. I remember the color of the plates and the hiss of sauce in the pan. In any other family, it probably would have looked like a small tragedy. Tears, pleading, apologies. In ours, it was more like a sitcom. My sister opened the notebook and read a line where I'd confessed to myself that I was afraid to wear shorts in the summer because I hated my knees. Sounds like nothing, right? But when that nothing comes out of someone else's mouth, and then your parents' laughter bounces around the kitchen, it feels like they're laughing at the very mechanism that keeps you breathing. I tried to grab the notebook back. She slipped away easily and read a couple more lines where I talked about why growing up scared me, like it was a narrow bridge without any railings. Mom said I was being dramatic. Dad said teenagers needed to learn self-irony. That night, I learned the family rule. In our house, pain is something you can serve at the table. I stopped writing for about a month, but the paper called me back, because silence in your head is louder than any argument. I bought another notebook, hid it somewhere else, became more careful, and underestimated her determination. My sister turned finding my diary into a sport. She knew my parents were on her side. Or more accurately, they thought it was just a harmless, sisterly joke. If I got upset, Mom would talk about trust in the family, and Dad would remind me I was too sensitive. My sister learned how to dig between the lines of my life like an experienced gardener. She knew exactly where the roots were weakest. Every new notebook lived a short, painful life. The smarter I hid it, the more excited she became. Sometimes she'd come into my room while I was in the shower and go through my drawers. Once, I came back and saw her pressing down on my mattress to check if I'd hidden it underneath. That was the first time I felt hatred so thick it followed me like the shadow of a building in the dead of winter. When I went to college, I moved into a dorm, and I thought, finally, a door with the lock of my dreams. But old habits die hard. On weekends, I'd come home because it was cheaper, and my parents loved our Sunday menu. Sometimes I brought my diary with me if I was worried my roommate might read it. On one of those trips, my sister found it again. She started reading bits where I wrote about a guy in my physics class, about how scared I was to say no, about how I compared myself to everyone and always came up short in my own mental scorecards. I listened, feeling myself thrown right back into those Sundays when I was learning to swallow humiliation in silence. Preview. My sister turned my personal life into a stand-up routine at family dinners. Who's laughing last? That's the line I came up with later when I finally realized where this was all headed. I stopped writing altogether. At first, it felt like a win. She'd lost her source of material, but the silence I prescribed for myself turned out to be more toxic than any painful text I'd ever written. I started falling asleep with my phone in my hand, scrolling through other people's stories just so I wouldn't have to hear my own thoughts. I began forgetting what I'd wanted to tell myself. And at some point, I realized I was hearing her voice inside my head when I thought. In my own mind, she had become the host too. The real crack in our relationship came when one of her sets included the thing I feared the most. I had written that I was thinking about seeing a therapist. I'd been having panic attacks. They came suddenly, like a fire alarm in a quiet neighborhood. She read that entry and laughed the way people laugh at some stupid YouTube clip. Mom added that it was just a trend, and Dad said that back in their day, people just got on with it and went to work. I didn't just feel embarrassed. I felt like I'd been declared insane right there in our living room. After that, I packed my backpack and went back to the dorm a week early, hiding from my own home the way you'd hide from the rain under a bus stop shelter. Then something strange happened. Life loves equations with unexpected solutions. I came home for the weekend because my grandma was flying in for a month. My sister came too, bringing her laptop out of habit and spilling her makeup bag across the table like it was her personal dressing room. I didn't want to talk to her. But she acted like the previous weeks had never happened, chatting with our parents about college, her new friends, and how everyone turned to look at her when she walked across campus. I sat in the corner, catching my own reflection in the oven door, because looking directly at her felt physically uncomfortable. She left her laptop open, the screen lighting up with notifications like a Christmas garland. I wasn't planning on looking. I'd had more than enough of people peeking into my life. But then I saw the icon for a very familiar app. I knew she had Tinder. She never hid her romantic victories. She often filled our dinner conversations with stories about guys who were funny, hopeless, or way too basic. In her stories, people were just props. Their feelings were disposable. I'm not sure how I ended up next to it, looking at the screen. It was like standing on the edge of a carousel and someone gave me a small push. A page was open with her chats, her photos, her edit profile tab. I saw messages that turned my stomach inside out. She was texting several guys at once, promising to go on dates the same night and arranging the timing so they'd never cross paths. She had notes on who was buying dinner, who was paying for the Uber, who brought her flowers. She took screenshots of sweet messages and sent them to her friend with captions, as if these guys were characters in a bad reality show. And then I saw a note about someone from our neighborhood, a man I respected because he was always kind to my grandma and carried her grocery bags up the stairs. The note described exactly how she planned to get him to do homework for one of her classes, hinting she'd be extra grateful. It wasn't her openness that scared me. It was the coldness. There were no waves of affection, no tides of attraction. Just gathering data, spreadsheets, and deadlines. I realized my sister saw people as buttons. And me? I was just the play button. And then I noticed a folder. It had some innocent name like filter photos, but inside were screenshots. They showed her conversations with guys from our college, from the next city over, from dating apps. The worst part? The notes next to them, where she wrote down who was useful, who was too emotional, who might get jealous. It was like a chessboard she was playing on, moving multiple pieces at once. I froze like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over me. I thought about my pages, where I'd tried to be honest, at least with myself, and hers, which looked like an instruction manual for exploiting other people's hopes. This is where I could insert some moral about how revenge doesn't fix anything, and maybe I would, if I were telling this story a year later. But in that moment, revenge was the only language my house knew how to speak to me. I wasn't going to keep living as a silent prop in the family display case. I wanted my right to a closed door back. I didn't come up with a plan right away. I went back to my dorm with a heavy head and light hands. I paced around my room, pretending to tidy my desk, all the while thinking about how I could make the world hear that I had a microphone too. And then it hit me. I created an anonymous account on our local student platform, The one where people posted news, gossip, and lost jackets. It was basically a virtual bulletin board. I knew that anything campus-related spread there like wildfire. And I knew my sister loved that platform almost as much as she loved the hallway mirror. I didn't use names. I didn't want it to look like some revenge plot with addresses and phone numbers. I didn't want to ruin her life forever. I just wanted to change the stage. I anonymously posted a collection of her Tinder conversations, with the men's names carefully removed, but with enough recognizable details about her that she'd bragged about publicly. Her favorite photos, her signature profile descriptions, little repeated phrases, her go-to emojis. I included excerpts from her notes where she planned how to use people for favors and rated who was more likely to pay for dinner, who was too sensitive. I did it carefully. No crude language, no lies, just the facts, exactly as she'd left them in her laptop. I captioned the post with a line that had been echoing in my head, part clickbait, part verdict. When your favorite filter isn't Instagram, but filtering people, here's how it works. And then the storm began. The internet is like the ocean. Calm one moment, and then the wave crashes right over you. The post blew up. People started discussing who this girl was, matching photos, quotes, and her style. Many recognized her. Isn't she the one with the perfect nails? The one who runs the student council? The eternal main character at every party? The comments were a mix: anger, shock, and a weird admiration for the raw honesty. But overall, people saw the coldness and were repulsed. Personal stories started surfacing from others who'd been caught in her net. Quiet little accounts of how someone paid for her Uber and then got ghosted, or how someone did a group project alone and was forgotten. I read them feeling a strange mix, like I was standing on the shore, sometimes pulled toward the water, sometimes pushed back onto the sand. Of course, my sister had no idea it was me. She tried to act like she'd been set up, like it was photoshopped, or that someone leaked her chats out of jealousy. But her world turned slippery fast, like a dance floor after too long of a party. At university, people started distancing themselves from her. Those who had once basked in her glow now stepped back. She still looked the same, but the air around her had changed. It was cautious. You see, this wasn't exactly being canceled. It was more like people realizing for the first time that your smile had a target. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in ages. Not from euphoria, not from bloodthirsty satisfaction, but from finally saying something out loud. I didn't have a microphone at the family table, but now I had one where my voice was actually heard. Was it fair? Maybe not. Was it cruel? In part. But it was the only thing I could do that actually shifted the balance of power. Of course, the fallout hit all of us. My sister caused a scene at home. She stormed into Sunday dinner and accused everyone of betrayal. My parents ran around the kitchen like firefighters without water. Mom tried to pin the blame on one of my friends. Dad threatened to deal with the platform as if it were some evil spirit to be exorcised. Grandma sat quietly, looking at me like she saw a reflection of something she'd known in her youth. She didn't say a word, but later that evening, when everyone had gone to their rooms, she came over and simply put her hand on my shoulder. In that moment, it felt like someone had finally turned a valve and let the water flow where it belonged. At university, people really did start picking on my sister. Bullying sounds like a heavy word, like school hallways and hair pulling, but that's exactly what it was. Not shoving or tripping, but constant snide remarks, whispers, strange stickers in the group chat. The ones she'd hurt with her coldness reacted, and so did those who just loved to join the mob for fun. I watched and tried to hold the line between she got what she deserved and nobody deserves this much venom. Sometimes I managed it. Sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I felt satisfaction, like finally fitting the last piece of a difficult puzzle. Sometimes I felt ashamed because I knew exactly what it was like to be the target of someone else's laughing audience. When the storm dragged on, I packed the essentials of my 20-year-old life. My laptop, a few clothes, a couple of books, a photograph we'd once taken in the summer, and a diary. A new one. The kind with empty pages that smelled of printing press hope, not old shame. I moved in with my grandmother. It was a decision that had been hanging in the air like curtains on a hot day. You just had to touch them, and they'd sigh. Her apartment was like an antiseptic for the soul. Old bookshelves, a warm glow lamp, a kettle that whistled like a train from a children's story, and silence. Real silence. Not the kind I'd imposed on myself as punishment. I closed my door and for the first time saw the lock click from the inside, not the outside. My grandma and I lived quietly. My parents called. They floated between pretending nothing had happened and staging a family courtroom drama where someone had to plead guilty. I rarely answered. I was tired of being the defendant. Sometimes they asked me to come back, promised they wouldn't laugh anymore, that they'd understand. But those were the promises of people who'd long confused closed doors with distrust. I knew, if I ever did come back to that table, it would only be with a new table etiquette. Maybe someday. Not now. My sister. She went through her downfall loudly and without breaks. It became harder for her to maintain her main character legend. Her world now demanded from her the very things she'd always demanded from others. Honesty, or at least silence. People whispered about her, made sly comments. Sometimes I heard she was skipping more classes, that fewer heads turned when she walked through campus. I didn't Google her name, didn't check her profiles. I chose not to know everything. Part of me wanted to rewind to the point where no one read anyone's words out loud. Another part knew. Going back is just a voice in an empty room. Violating boundaries isn't just a hole in the fence someone climbed through. It's a habit you're left to live with. Like a new way of breathing. Moving in with my grandma reminded me that boundaries aren't walls. They're shorelines, where you can stand without fearing the wave will knock you down. In my new diary, the first pages were a set of rules I promised never to break for myself. I vowed never to turn people into buttons, never to fetishize someone else's vulnerability, and never to turn another person's pain into content. Sure, it sounds lofty for a 20-year-old, but my pain had never been age-appropriate. I know my revenge was rash. I know that what she was doing in her apps under normal circumstances still wouldn't be something you'd post online. But no one had ever listened to me when I spoke in the language of requests. They heard me only when I spoke in the language of consequences. And if this story were to have a headline, it would be, "My family laughed at my secrets over dinner. I made the world laugh at her dating playbook. Now I live with my grandma and write again. But only for me." And the preview would be even shorter. When someone reads your diary out loud, one day you'll read their Tinder. What happened to us after? I'm learning to talk about myself without surrender and without attack. At university, people started seeing me as someone they'd never really known, because I'd been so quiet before. I discovered I have my own sense of humor that doesn't rely on someone else's reactions. I found I can sit at a table in the cafeteria without feeling like I'm about to be dragged out for everyone's amusement. I stopped patting my pockets for my diary as if it were a ticking time bomb. I carry it in my backpack again, and I know, even if someone really wants to, they can't get to it now. Sometimes at night, when my grandma's already asleep, I make tea and think about my sister. I don't gloat, but I don't rush to save her either. It's a strange place between justice and mercy, like standing on a pier that juts just 2 steps into the ocean, where you're pulled in and pushed back by turns. I don't know if she's learned anything besides caution. Maybe she'll learn empathy. Maybe she won't. But I no longer have to live according to her lessons. I found my own teacher in a quiet room, where the lamp's light is warmer than cruel laughter, where the kettle always has time to boil, and where my words have only one listener, me. That's the story. It doesn't have the movie-style catharsis where everyone hugs in the final scene and music swells. It has a different kind of catharsis, practical, like a new lock on a door. I'm not holier. I'm not worse. I'm just someone who no longer hands the microphone to a person who reads other people's pages out loud. And if you've read to the end and are looking for something to latch onto for a comment, here are a few ideas. Can revenge be a language of self-defense when requests don't work? Where's the line between exposing someone and bullying them? Who should have stood between me and my sister? My parents? My teachers? Or me? And the biggest question: how long does it take to learn to laugh and cry without an audience? I'm still figuring that one out. But now, on a page in my diary that no one carries to the family table,